React. All right, so I've stopped my front-end server, my React dev server, and I want to now at least serve some products from the backend. We're not going to get into the database or anything just yet. I just want to take the file, this products.js that we have right here, and move it to the backend and have to fetch it from React, fetch it from our front end. So what we'll do first is create a folder in the root called backend. And we need to initialize package.json. And I'm not going to put it in the backend folder. I want the package.json and the node modules to be in the root for the server. So I'm going to go make sure you're in the root, not in the front end or backend, and say npm init. And we're just going to go through this real quick. Description, I'll say mern, shopping cart app, or whatever you'd like. And then server.js. I actually meant to put my name there, but that's fine. So that creates a package.json. And I'm just going to put my name. You can put your own. That's fine. And let's install Express. So I'm going to npm install Express. Again, make sure you're in the root. And that should get added here as a dependency. All right, now in the backend folder here, I'm going to create a file called server.js. And this is going to be our entry point for the server, for our backend. And I'm also going to create a folder called data. And I'm going to copy from the front end source folder this products.js. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'm not going to move it because that'll break the front end for now. I'm just going to copy it and paste it in the data folder. And then what I want to do is create some routes to serve the products from the backend. So in our server.js, let's bring in Express by saying const express equals require Express. And I just want to take a minute to talk a little bit about modules. So this syntax where we use this require is common.js. This is traditionally what Node.js is used. On the front end, we're using the import syntax, which is ES modules. Now with Node, I believe it was 14.4, you can use ES modules now without having to use something like Babel or without the experimental flag. So we're actually going to do that later, but I'm not going to focus on that right now. For now, I'm going to use common.js, and then we'll move to ES modules later. So let's go ahead and initialize Express with a variable called app. And then we can take that app and listen on a port. Let's listen on 5000. And I'm going to just console log here. So just do console log and say server running on port 5000. Now later on, like this will be in an environment variable, and we'll have separate files for routes and models and controllers. But for now, I just want to do something very, very simple. I just want to serve that JSON data to these products. So if I save that and I run node and backend slash server, you'll see server running on port 5000. So just these 3 lines will let us run the server. It doesn't do anything. We don't even have any routes, but it does run. So I can control C to stop that. Now instead of having to do, node backend server, what I'm going to do is go into my package.json in the root, and I'm going to create a script for start. And we can get rid of this. So for start, we're going to run node backend slash server. That way we can run our server now with npm start. Okay, we're going to stop that again. And let's create a route. So I'm going to say app.get, meaning that if we get a get request to slash, then we want to run a function that takes in a request and response object. And all I want to do is take that response object and call send. So I'm sending to the client, API is running. And now if I run this with npm start, server's running. If I go to my browser and I go to HTTP localhost 5000, you'll see API is running. All right, now obviously this doesn't really do much, so I want to copy this and I want to create an API route. So I'm going to say slash API slash products. Get rid of this. And I want to bring in this file right here, but this is actually right here, export default products. This is ES modules, and we don't have our backend set up for ES modules yet, so we're going to change it to common.js, which is module.exports equals products. And we'll close that up and we'll bring that right in here. So const products equals require dot slash data slash products. And then down here in this route, I'm going to I could do res.send, but it's JSON, so I'm going to do res.json and pass in products. And even though it's a JavaScript array of objects, it's not actual JSON, res.json or res.send is going to convert it to the JSON content type. So if I save that and we restart our server, and now I go to 5000 slash API slash products, you'll see that it'll give us a JSON array with all of our products. Now, last thing I want to do here before we move back to our front end is create a route to get just a single product by its ID. So I'm going to copy that, and this will be API products slash :ID. And what I'll do is the same thing we did in the product screen on the front end. I'm going to just say const product, set it to products.find, and say for each product, we want to see where the product._ID is equal to whatever this is. And we can get this with the request object and then .params.id or whatever you have here. So that'll get that single product, and then we'll return it. So it's just going to be a single JSON object. So let's restart the server. And now let's say product/2, and we get that single product. All right, so this is a very, very simple backend, simple server, but I want to now jump back into React and make a request to the backend to get those products, as opposed to just bringing in a file that we have stored in the source folder. Okay, so what we want to do now is in our front end, to get our products, instead of loading the products file directly that's in the front end, we want to fetch it from this route here in our backend, this API/products, which returns all the products from the backend. So I'm going to close that file up. I'm going to leave my server running on 5000, and then in my front end, so I'm just going to go to a different terminal here, a different tab, and I'm going to run npm start. Actually, before we do that, there's one dependency that we need to install, which is Axios. And Axios is an HTTP library. We use it to make HTTP requests to our backend, although you could use the fetch API if you'd like. I just find Axios easier and more powerful, so that's what I always use. So just make sure you install that, and then we'll run npm start. So I have my backend and front end both running, although these products are still coming from the products.js in the front end. So we want to change that. So let's go to our home screen, because that's where we're loading them, which right now we're just bringing that file in directly. So we're bringing this file in here, but we want to request it from our backend. So let's get rid of this. And what I'm going to do for now is add products as component level state. Now, when it comes to state, you have component level and you have global or application level state. Now, products ultimately is going to be global state when we get into Redux, but for now, I'm just going to make it part of this component. Now, generally, component level state will be things like, if it's a menu component, you might have an open and close state. Something like that would be for component level. When you have forms, the separate fields, those would be part of your component state. But things like products, users, your cart, stuff like that is going to be global state through Redux. But just for now, we're just taking it step by step. So we're going to bring in the use state hook from React. And that's what useState is for. It's to use state in functional components. Because traditionally with class-based components, you would define your state in the constructor. Well, with functions, we obviously don't have a constructor, so we use the useState hook. And the way we do that is we set a set of brackets to useState. And in these brackets, we pass in two things. What we want to call this piece of state, which is products, and then what we want to call the function to manipulate or change the state, which we'll call setProducts. And then whatever we want to set as a default for products, we pass in here, which is going to be an empty array. Now, if I go ahead and save this, it should still, we shouldn't get any, it shouldn't break because we still have products defined and we're mapping through it down here. It's just an empty array. So if we go to the front end now here in the browser, we just don't see anything, any products. But there's no, it's not broken, there's no errors or anything, there's just nothing here. So what we want to do now is use the useEffect hook to make a request to our back end. Because what useEffect does is we define it and it takes in an arrow function, and whatever we put in here is going to run as soon as the component loads. So if we do console log, we'll just say console log hello. If we go over here and we open up our console, you can see it's just logging hello. So as soon as this home screen loads, that's going to fire off. Now that's where we want to make our request because we want these products as soon as the component loads. So in here is where we're going to make our Axios request. So there's a few ways we could do this. We could just say axios.get and make a get request to /API/products. Now that returns a promise, so we could do .then, pass in our response, and so on. However, I don't like the .then syntax. I'd rather use async await. Now, when you use async await, this returns a promise. That means we have to call await on this, and we can't actually make this arrow function async. We can't do that. So we actually have to create a separate function within useEffect. So let's get rid of this and let's say const. I'm going to call this fetch products, and this can be async. So it's an asynchronous function, and then we're going to set const, and we could do response equals await axios.get, and then pass in /API products. And what would happen is on this res right here would have a data object assigned to it. So we'd have access to res.data. Now, to make this just a little cleaner, I'm going to destructure data from that so that we can use the data variable directly. Now, once we fetch that data, we want to set it to this product. We want to change it from this empty array to the data that we get back from that endpoint. So we do that by calling setProducts, because that's what we defined above to change this piece of state. Now, this function is all set. We just have to call it. So outside of fetchProducts, let's call it fetchProducts. Now, as a second argument to useEffect, you want to pass in an array of dependencies. And what I mean by that is anything that you want to fire useEffect off when it changes. So if we have some variable called test, and when that value changes, you want this to fire off and fire off some side effects, then you would put that in as a dependency. And it generally will give you warnings if you put stuff in here and you don't claim it as a dependency. So, but right now we don't actually need anything, so it's just going to be an empty array here. All right, so if we go ahead and save this, let's look down here. Axios is not defined, so I forgot to bring in Axios, so let's do that. And this is all temporary. Later on, we're going to be using Redux, and we make all of our requests from what are called action creators. But right now, we're just doing it right from the component. So if I go to our front end now, we're not seeing any products, and we're seeing this in the console, this 404 error not found. And the reason for that is what it's looking at is localhost 3000 /API/products, because we didn't define anything in here like localhost 5000. And if we did do that, we would get a CORS error, a cross-domain error. So what we want to do is add a proxy that will, instead of looking at localhost 3000, it'll look at localhost 5000. And we can add a proxy by going into the front end package.json, which is right here. Make sure it's the front end, has this React stuff. And let's go ahead and add right under name, we'll say proxy. And let's do HTTP, and then 127.0.0.1, which is your loopback address. That's your local host, and you want port 5000. Now, once you add a proxy, you just want to restart your front-end server. And now if we go back here, once this loads, it should work. There we go. So now we're getting the products from our back end. In fact, if we open up our network tab and we look at products and we look at the response, you can see the data that's coming back. All right, you can also see the headers. You can see it's a 200, okay. That means everything's good. It was a GET request. The content type should be application/JSON. So we're now fetching that from our back end. Now let's do the same thing for the single page, because right now if we go to the single product page, this is still getting it from the front end products.json file. So let's go to product screen. And what we'll do here is same thing. We're going to bring in both hooks, useState and useEffect. And what we want for our state is going to be just product. Let's get rid of this, bringing in the products file, and let's get rid of this because we're going to be fetching it from the back end. So let's say const, and this is just going to be product because it's a single product, and then set product, and set that from useState. And the default is just going to be an empty object, okay, because product is an object. And then I'm actually going to copy from the home screen. Let's copy this whole useEffect right here. It's going to be very similar. And let's put that here. And instead of fetch products, let's just take the S off because we're fetching a single product. And the route is going to be API/products. And then we want to get the ID from here, from the URL. And the way we do that is with props.match. So we already have match in here. And what I'm going to do is just replace these quotes with backticks so we can put a variable in here and say slash. And then we want to match dot params dot and then ID. So that's going to hit whatever the ID is. And then we want to set product to make sure you take the S off of that to the data. And then call fetch product. And then product should be filled. And down here, we don't have to change anything else. So let's save that. And of course, we need to bring in Axios. And let's go back here. So now this should be coming from the back end. So if I open my Chrome tools here and I go to my network tab, I'm just going to reload. You'll see this one, which is the ID of the product. And if you look at the response, we're getting that single object. And that's being loaded over here. So now we shouldn't even need this front end products.js, which is, where is it? Right here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And this should all still work because we're not using that file anymore. We're fetching everything from the back end. So now I want to start to work on the back end a little bit more. I want to add something called nodemon so we don't have to keep restarting the server. I also want to use a package called concurrently so we can run both the back end and front end server at the same time with the same command instead of having to, run React here and then run Express here. So we'll get into that next. All right, so I've stopped both my front end and my back end server. So you can see this is stopped and my React server in the front end is also stopped. So I'm going to go to my root here and I want to install nodemon and also concurrently. So I'm going to install these, and I'm actually going to install these as dev dependencies. So I'm going to just put a dash uppercase D here, which will install these as dev dependencies because we only need these for development. And those should get added to our root package.json as dev dependencies, as you can see right here. Now, NodeMon is a tool that we can use to constantly watch our server so that we don't have to keep resetting it, because we don't use something like NodeMon. I mean, there's other things you can use as well, but if we don't use anything, then every time we make a change to, server.js, we have to keep restarting the server. So to use NodeMon, we're going to go into our package.json and create a script right here. So we have our start script, which runs the backend server file. Now I'm going to add another script called server, and this is going to run, it's going to run the backend server file, but we're going to use NodeMon to run it. So backend/server. All right, now I'm also going to have a script to run the client, to run the front end, React. So let's call this client, and here we won't remember to run that. We run npm start. However, we don't want to run npm start from the root. We need to run it from the front end folder. So the way we can do that is we can add a -- prefix and then the name of the folder front end. So essentially it's going to go into the front end folder first and then run npm start. So let's save this and let's try it out. So if I run npm in the root, npm run server, you'll see it's running on port 5000, and NodeMon is watching our files. So that way, if I go to my browser here and I go to just localhost 5000, we get APIs running. If I add another dot here, so it's 4 dots, and save, you'll see that it refreshes down here. And if I go and refresh my browser, now there's 4 dots. So I don't have to keep coming down here and restarting it. And as far as the client script goes, if I run npm run client, it's going to go into my front end folder and run the React dev server. Now we're going to have an issue because I'm only running the front end, and my products aren't there because my backend's not running, so it's not responding. So concurrently, we can use to run both at the same time. So let's stop this, and let's go back into our package.json here, and we want to use concurrently. So let's go right under where we have client, and let's call this dev. And what we can do is, in some double quotes here, we're going to say concurrently, and we have to run both npm run server and npm run client, and we have to wrap these in quotes that are escaped. So we want to do // npm run server. We want to run that first. Then we need to have another escaped quote here, and then we'll put a space and another escaped quote, and then npm run client // and then we have one last double quote here that wraps this whole thing. So if I go ahead and save that, and let's clear this up, and let's say npm run dev. So we should see it start on 5000, which is our backend, and then it also starts the 3000 server, which is our front end. So now we have both running. If I go back here to /API products, you can see that we get our products, and that's what was being displayed here. So from now on, we can just do npm run dev, and we can run both. Now, I just want to address this real quick. So React hook use effect has a missing dependency, and this is in product screen. So in product screen, for a dev dependency, it's saying that match.params.id needs to be added as a dependency. So what we can do is just add match right in here, and that should stop this warning from showing. So let's save. And that warning shouldn't show anymore, and it will also show in the console, so we can check the console. Good. And might as well just leave this open so we can see any warnings like that. All right, so now that we can run both the front end and the back end at the same time, in the next video, I want to start to look at environment variables. I want to put the port, for instance, in environment variable. I want to put the node environment if it's development or production, and ultimately we'll put our database URI, our PayPal API key. Any sensitive information is going to go in that file. So we're going to get into that next. Okay, so in this video, I want to go ahead and set up environment. I'm going to use a package called .env. So .env, we want to just install it and then require it and call this config method. And we can create a file called .env. And then anywhere in our application, we can use process.env and then whatever we set. So in this case, they're setting a database host, user, and password. All right, so let's go ahead and install this. So I'm just going to stop my server. I'm doing npm run dev, which was running both my front end and back end. So I just stopped that. And in the root here, I'm going to say npm install .env. All right, and then I don't even need my front end right now, so I'll just do npm run server. If you just want to run the back end, we can do that. So let's see, let's go into our server.js, and here we want to bring in .env, so let's go right here and say const.env. In the next video, we're going to switch to ES modules as well, so we don't have to keep doing this require syntax. So .env, and then we'll go right above where we initialized express and say .env.config, like that. Now we do need to create a .env file, so let's go to right in the root here. I'm going to create a file called .env, and this is where we can define any environment variables. So any API keys or stuff like that, any token secrets you want to put in here. I'm going to put my node env, my node environment in here, which I'm going to set to development, and then I'm also going to set my port in here to 5000, and I'm going to save that. Now, whenever you add a new environment variable, you just want to restart your server, and then let's go into our server.js and let's try it out. So down here, you can see I just have 5000 hard coded in there. What I'm going to do instead is say const port and set that to whatever is in my .env, and we can do that with process.env. And this is going to be the port. Now I also want to put an or here, so or meaning if that's not found, then use port 5000. Okay, and then down here we'll say port, and over here let's change this to backticks, and instead of putting 5000 here, we'll put in port. And I also want to put the mode we're in, so we'll say server running in, and then here we'll say process.env.node_env, so it'll be like development or production. So server running in development mode on port, and then whatever port. All right, now let's save this, and down here you'll see it says server running in development mode on port 5000. So it's reading that port and it's reading the node environment from the .env file, and now we can use this syntax with any environment variable throughout our whole application. Now, one thing you want to make sure of is that your .env file, if it has sensitive information, you want to make sure it's in the git ignore, and you can see we have it right here. So if you don't have that, just go ahead and add it, because if you push to GitHub or Bitbucket or something like that, you don't want people to see what you have in there, because normally you'll have token secrets and API keys and database strings. You don't want that stuff shown to the public, so make sure that you don't have that in your repo. All right, so next thing I want to do is convert this common JS syntax with require to ES modules, which used to be known as ES 2015 modules, because I want to use the import syntax. I want to have the same type of modules that we have on the front end in the back end as well. So now I want to convert from common.js, which is this require syntax, to the import style syntax, which are ECMAScript modules or ES modules. So with Node version, I believe it's 14.4 and higher, you don't need to have like an experimental flag or anything like that. There's just a couple things we need to do. So check out what version of Node you're using. You can just say node -- version. You can see I'm using version 14.9. I believe the latest is 14.12. So I should be fine. If you have something under, like I said, 14. Let's just say 6 to be safe, because I'm not exactly sure. Then just go ahead and download a newer version. Now, the only thing we really need to do, so if we go into the docs here for ECMAScript modules, and let's see. So there's actually two ways we can do this. We could use .mjs for our extensions instead of JS, which I really don't like and I don't want to do. I want to use .js like we've been doing. The only thing we need to add to be able to do that is add a type module in our package.json. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So I'm going to just grab this, and in my root package.json here, let's go, I'll go right under this main here, and we just want to add type module and save. Now, the one difference between the front end, using ES 2015 modules in the front end and the back end is you have to have a .js on your files, not on your packages like Express and .env, but if you're bringing in files, you have to have a .js, and I'll show you what it does if you don't. So let's just go ahead and convert these. So instead of const express, we're going to say import express from express, and convert this. So import .env from env, and then let's import products from. Now this is a file, so I'll just show you what happens here. So if I save this and I try to run my server with npm run server, I'm going to get this error, this module not found. So it's showing this data / products, which is this right here. So whenever you bring a file in, you simply add .js. So if I save that and restart this, so what we have here is the products.js. Remember we changed it to module.exports. That's using common.js. We now want to change this back to export default products, and then that should work. Oops, bring this up here, and there we go. So now everything's working. Let's try and run npm run dev, make sure the whole thing still works. Okay, so our backend starts up, our front end starts up, and there we go. So now we don't have to worry about using, that require syntax. We can use import and export on both the front end and the back end. Just make sure you add that type module to your package.json, and make sure you add .js when you bring in actual JavaScript files. So next thing I want to do is start to implement our database, because right now we're just serving this products.js file. Well, of course, that's not what we want to do. Ultimately, we want to serve it from MongoDB. So we're going to be using MongoDB Atlas, which is a cloud database. So we don't actually have to install it on our machine. You can if you want. The process is the same. You'll just have a different type of string. It'll be your local host. And we're also going to use something called MongoDB Compass, which is a desktop program that allows us to log into our database and see our data and change it and do whatever. So we'll do that in the next video, in the next section.